Well, I welcome everyone to the Aquarian series presented by the San Diego Lodge. And today we have a presentation by Jonathan Colbert, who needs no introduction because he's been a major player in this series for several years. And Jonathan has long been a member, an associate of the Santa Barbara and San Diego lodges and has done a lot of work for Theosophy. So we're going to be happy to hear him on the very important subject of Promethean Foresight today. And there are also some future programs we need to discuss that are coming up. The ULT San Diego Aquarian Series, Training the Mind. And there's a quotation here, to think and live universally, from Hermes. And also we have to think about self-magnetization. That's coming up on August 19th, and a very important topic. And then the subject of the bell. You see the bell and scepter from Tibetan Buddhism. They're so important in their ritual in this slide. So we have a great deal that's coming up. Also, deity yoga, which is important in Tibetan Buddhism. This student once heard a great lecture from the Dalai Lama on deity yoga, and it's great importance in the symbolism of the pictured deities, which are, of course, really not the full symbol. And of course, we also have to think of today being August 5th in the Aquarian series, and the importance that it has at the moment. That's not up on the screen, but I think you've all had a chance to read it. Okay.
Go ahead, Judy.
Okay, well, are you ready to go ahead with the presentation on
Sure.
Promethean Foresight?
Yeah.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Judy. Thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. So nice to see you. It's very auspicious that we would be thinking about Promethean Foresight on the week prior to HPB's birthday. She was born at midnight. That's apparently when a lot of sacred beings are born, is at midnight. In her case, it was between the 11th and the 12th of August. And it is very appropriate that we would be considering the topic of Promethean Foresight, because if HPB was anything, that she was a Promethean. And she was giving a teaching that would be a teaching for her time, for our time, for the entire Aquarian age and beyond. And her teachings and the philosophy that she gave is so profound and so broad that it will occupy the deepest, most profoundest minds for centuries. Now, this topic here on Promethean Foresight, we need to first go into who Prometheus is. Most of us have some idea of that. And Prometheus was a Greek, well, we say that he was a god, but more specifically, he was a Titan. And I'm not personally, this student doesn't know really the difference between a god and a Titan. I have the feeling that Judy does. She will be chairing this and she will be taking questions. But apparently we all have something of the Titan within us, and especially of Prometheus within us. So this presentation is about the noblest, most magnanimous aspect of ourselves. And if all or most of humanity knew that ultimately our ultimate spiritual DNA is modeled after the idea and the ideal and even the ordeal of Prometheus, then life would be chocked full of meaning for all souls. Prometheus is really a being of sacrifice. In this fourfold picture gallery here on the flyer, it tells the story, and different artists are summoned to tell us the story here, so skillfully put together in this flyer. Prometheus is the one who is concerned that humanity really needs forethought and needs thought, and needs the gift of mind. So he steals fire from the gods, and namely from Zeus. And Zeus is the king of the gods, somewhat like Indra in India. But Zeus doesn't think that humanity is ready, or doesn't think that humanity can handle the truth, so to speak, that can handle the gift of fire, because he knows that humanity, it's just not very safe to give humanity a lot of thinking powers, and who knows what humanity will do with them. But Prometheus has a different take on it, and he, who happens to be the god of foresight, he knows full well that there'll be consequences, and he's willing to take those consequences. And so he's ultimately like the Bodhisattva ideal, or even the Kuan Yin pledge, where he's almost reckless in giving away. He really thinks that humanity deserves to have this power of mind. So he brings fire to mankind, as it portrays in the second picture here. And that fire bestows the gift of the arts, of the sciences, of mathematics, of language, of all things that have to do with the culture of the mind. But there's a price that is paid, and he is chained to the Caucasus, apparently, and he's chained on a cliff by the minions of Zeus, apparently. Let me see if I can move this thing. Oh, wait, what happened just then? And then this last picture shows him having his liver eaten out every day, apparently. And is a vulture, I think, that eats it out. And the liver, apparently in Grecian times, was representative of the soul of man, even more than the heart. It was the vitality. And it's also the organ of purification, which is interesting, and therefore regeneration. So poor Prometheus is chained to these rocks, and every day his liver is eaten out by these horrible birds. And then it regenerates and it grows back again. And I think even biologically, the liver has that capability. And it is a symbol of regeneration in that sense. I did bring, or I did, supply part of Prometheus Unbound, which is by Shelley. Apparently, Aeschylus wrote Prometheus Bound, but Shelley thought it to write his great poem on Prometheus Unbound. And I was wondering if we could have a volunteer to read this poem. I have 3 slides. And actually, Monica, you happen to be here in the lodge. Do you mind reading that? And in which case you would just come up to the computer because the microphone's up here.
Okay.
And when you get to the end, there's 3 of these screens like this, and when you get to the end, just do that.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's the 3rd one. So victory would be the last word. So I'm going to go back. 1, 2. Okay.
So am I doing just the first one?
That's
or-
all 3,
Okay,
if you don't mind.
no problem. Great to be with you, everybody. Prometheus Unbound. This is the day which down the void abysm at the earthborn's spell yawns for heaven's despotism, and conquest is dragged captive through the deep. Love, from its awful throne of patient power in the wise heart, from the last giddy hour of dread endurance, from the slippery steep and narrow verge of crag-like agony, springs and folds over the world its healing wings. Prometheus Unbound. Gentleness, virtue, wisdom, and endurance. These are the seals of that most firm assurance which bars the pit over destruction's strength. And if with infirm hand, eternity, mother of many acts and hours, should free the serpent that would clasp her with his length, these are the spells by which to reassume an empire o'er the disentangled dew. To suffer woes which hope thinks infinite, to forgive wrongs darker than death or night, to defy power which seems omnipotent, to love and bear, to hope till hope creates from its own wreck the thing it contemplates, neither to change, nor falter, nor repent. This, like thy glory, Titan, is to be good, great, and joyous, beautiful, and free. This is alone life, joy, empire, and victory.
Thank you, Monica. You're gonna fix that? Okay. Cool. Well, you can see that Shelley was very moved by the ideal of Prometheus and the sacrifice of Prometheus. I mean, you can just tell by the way he wrote that poem, it just moved into his core. We will be exploring today kind of a facet of the Promethean myth, which is that of foresight, Promethean Foresight. And we will be using as resources the myth itself, some of the dimensions of the myth, and the Aquarian Almanac for this week is very, very helpful. And several of the quotes from the Almanac this week have to do with resolve. And I think that is a big clue as to what Promethean Foresight has to do with, because it isn't just any kind of foresight. And I think we're going to be asking that question a lot, is what is foresight and what is Promethean Foresight theosophically? Now, here's a guy that a lot of people think of as being a Promethean person because he seems to be on the forefront of lots of things and he gets in the news and so forth. And so we're going to bring up maybe a few examples like this of Prometheus and Promethean Foresight, but maybe only to draw a contrast between maybe a theosophical notion of foresight. We don't want to be putting this man down, that would be me like a chihuahua nipping at the heels of a brilliant giant. But so I don't want to do that. But what about this kind of foresight where you see technology and you see a need and you see an opportunity? is that real theosophical Promethean foresight? Everybody says that he invented the Tesla, right? And there is another person who actually did invent the Tesla, and he is a young man that I grew up with. And I grew up with these three brothers, and they were all about 40,000 times more brilliant than I was. But for some reason, they allowed me to hang out with them. And they were into technology and into science and engineering and so forth. And this fellow here, Martin Eberhard, he's the middle of the three brothers. He's the one that actually invented Tesla, and this is the first Tesla Roadster. And I used to argue with him actually a lot. Unfortunately, if I could, in 2020 hindsight, I would not have argued with him. But he was like a materialist. And the reason I want to bring that up, at least he was when he was an adolescent, when I knew him. But I kept trying to argue more of a theosophical side of things, and I don't know why even argue with people. But my reason that I want to almost say that he is a Promethean is because of his idealism. I would ask him what he wants to do when he grows up. He says, I want to be an inventor. What kind of things you want to invent? I don't know, just stuff that'll help humanity. And he was really into the idea of helping nature and the environment, even as a teenager. And so he did, and he majored in electronics, and he invented something that has to do with Kindle technology, made $200 million, sold his company, and then he started Tesla. And but then he didn't have enough money to turn it into a car company. He sold a few of his roadsters to a few rich people, celebrities, and so forth, but he couldn't really get it going. So then he met Elon Musk, and that's another whole story. But everybody thinks that Elon Musk invented Tesla, and he didn't. It's this man here. You can Google it, Martin Eberhard, Tesla, stuff like that, and it'll tell all that story. But the reason, there's an article from HPB, and I have to admit, I forgot the name of the article, but she makes the argument that a materialist who is an altruist is in some ways higher than a person who believes in the afterlife, because the afterlife person thinks that they're going to get rewarded for their altruism. But a materialist is they're just doing it unconditionally for humanity. So you could argue that that is at the heart of things, at the fundamental vibration, at the core of motivation, that's kind of an insight into Promethean Foresight. And another thing that he had another insight was that people asked him, well, why did you, if you're really trying to help humanity, why did you invent such an expensive car? He says, well, I wanted to start at the highest DNA so that the engineering would be at the most perfectest level, so that by the time it did turn into these electric cars for the masses, then all of that special technology would be in those cars. But anyway, just a thought. All right, his hero was Tesla. Now Tesla, that's a funny looking guy. If you look him up on the YouTube, that I almost couldn't handle looking at him, but he's a really intense guy. But his hero was, so I found this image that didn't seem so shocking, but you can just see how penetrating this guy is. But he was kind of a Promethean at the latter part of the 1800s or the 19th century. And he invented all kinds of things that have to do with electronics. And one of the things that Martin would say about this guy is that he was misunderstood. And that was one of the reasons why he really liked this man. And I think that that's another Promethean kind of characteristic, is to stand up for the underdog and to see the brilliance in beings or people that other people might not see. So this is a drawing contributed by Sasha, who, my daughter, and I asked her, could you draw a picture of the gift of Manas? And she did. And this is what she came up with. So I thought it was beautiful. But it really shows just kind of the unconditional offering of the gift of Manas, which is what Prometheus was about. Now, I did go back to some earlier issues of Vidya magazine that was produced by Santa Barbara Lodge in the winter of 2011. And there's some writing in it that it kind of covers some of the basics about Prometheus and kind of a theosophical understanding of Prometheus. And I'll just read some from it. The anonymous writer writes, when we truly perceived that we have received a gift, because that article is called The Gift of Manas, we are filled with gratitude. We do not say to ourselves, of course I have this, I earned it. I can squander this possession as I like, if I like. Instead, we think about the sacrifice that must have been involved in making the gift possible, about how fortunate we are, how the gift cannot be taken for granted and must be shared. We feel a deep sense of unity with the giver of the gift and with all others who have received the gift, such as the primordial feeling of humanity upon receiving the initial gift of Manas over 18 million years ago. And then there's this quote from page 210 of the first volume of The Secret Doctrine. When moved by the law of evolution, the lords of wisdom infused into him the spark of consciousness. The first feeling it awoke to life and activity was a sense of solidarity, of oneness with his spiritual creators. It's interesting that this gift of mind invoked this incredible sense of solidarity and oneness. So going on, this writer writes and says, the Greek myth of Prometheus gives clues of how we came to be who we are. Prometheus and his Titan brother Epimetheus are charged by Zeus to form the creatures of the earth from clay, after which Athena breathes life into them. Epimetheus, whose name means hindsight, undertakes the task of distributing all the qualities to the creatures. To some animals, he distributes armor, to others, swiftness, camouflage, beaks, claws, and fangs, wings, and feathers. Unfortunately, by the time he gets to humanity, Epimetheus, he who sees behind, I guess, has given away all the gifts. Human beings are born unshod, without horns, without fur, without wings, without feathers, and without speed. So Prometheus, he's concerned. His name means foresight, and he sees the need and recognizes the risk involved in interceding on humanity's behalf. Courting sure punishment from Zeus, Prometheus sets out to bring fire to the fledgling humans. The jealous king of the gods has locked the gates to Mount Olympus to ensure that fire is not brought to the mortals. When Prometheus arrives at Olympus on his self-assigned mission, Athena tells him of a secret entrance. Stealing in, Prometheus lights his own torch from the chariot of Helios and then sets coals of fire until they are burning embers. These he conceals in a fennel stalk, passes by the guards, and successfully brings down fire to the world of mortal man. And then the article goes on. Prometheus, the Promethean ability to have foresight allows us to learn. You know what? I'm going to have to get out of this for a second. Now I have to move this. Now I'm going to go back into this. Sorry about that. The Promethean ability to have foresight allows us to learn from the past and avoid making the same mistakes again and again. When we exercise foresight, we prepare in advance for any likely weaknesses or disturbances to our plans so that we can remain untroubled by the physical, mental, or emotional oscillations of mortal life. Such equipoise goes beyond the mere controlling of events to avoid personal suffering. Being Promethean is more of a stance of effortless equipoise than a calculated series of winning chess moves. Another paragraph here, the Aquarian axioms of HPB And these are 10 of the axioms that are in the HPB birthday book of axioms. And most of them are from June, actually. And the people in the Santa Barbara Lodge, they extracted 10 of them out and called them the Aquarian axioms, and they're in the Theosophical Tenets. The Aquarian axioms of HPB point out that self-knowledge is greater than being able to control the elements or to foretell the future. Anytime we seek to apply theosophical ideals, such as the Kuan Yin Pledge, forethought is required. For past karma is sure to crop up as a strong opponent to be bested. With deliberation, we can prepare to live up to our ideals and ideas in the moment as difficult circumstances and our own ingrained tendencies arrive. Self-questioning, honesty, and fearlessness are the keys. Now, to try and get a little closer to this idea of what we think that is a theosophical idea of true foresight. There is this quote from the Voice of Silence: "Hast thou attuned thy heart and mind to the great mind and heart of all mankind?" Now, just a simple example of the opposite of foresight is if you think about all the wars that the United States of America has participated in since World War II. The Korean War, Vietnam War, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now the one we're in now. All the wars sound really good in the beginning. At least they sound good enough to enough people. And somehow we get talked into this, and people that we didn't vote for or somebody, they get these wars started. But the point is that they're all just really Epimethean, because we never have an exit strategy. Every single war that we've gotten into, we had no way to get out of. Eisenhower had a pretty good way to get out of the Korean War, but it was still kind of random, but at least he came up with something decisive and got it done and got out. The rest of them were just disasters in terms of their end. They would go in with lots of sound and fury, and they seemed like they had some kind of an idea, a stated purpose, but obviously they didn't really have a purpose because there wasn't any exit strategy. Nobody could even think through what it would look like when the war was done. So every single one, we just left, and the place was worse than it was before we got there. It could be the case with the present war, but we'll see what happens with that. But that's another thing where we're starting something and we don't know how to finish it, even the current war that we're in, when you think it through. So now Gandhi is giving us an alternative. I apologize for the unreadability of this. I've got it half memorized, so I'll probably get through it. Gandhi says, "I will give you a talisman. Whenever you are in doubt or when the self becomes too much with you, apply the following test. Recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man whom you may have seen, and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him. Will he gain anything by it? Will it restore him to a control over his own life and destiny? In other words, will it lead to swaraj for the hungry and spiritually surviving millions? Then you will find your doubts and yourself melting away." So this must be a clue about what Promethean Foresight is. You're getting out of yourself. You're getting out of these fears and doubts. You're thinking about how to give spiritual freedom to as many people as you can think of. And he's saying that the test of that is, who is the poorest person that you even know? Is what you're going to do going to be of any help to that person? So it's the beginning of that kind of unconditional Promethean magnanimity that Promethean Foresight implies, it seems. Now, in defense of poor Prometheus, and I'm sure Judy will do a good job of keeping Prometheus in some kind of dignity. But at the according to the myth, at the bottom of the Pandora's box, which is what poor Prometheus opens up, there's actually something very special, because a lot of ills and problems and complicated karma comes out of that box. And it's called Pandora's box. And but at the bottom of the box, apparently there's hope. It's the last thing in the box. Isn't that mysterious? So there's something even in Prometheus that there's hope, and we can see that. You know, we say 2020 hindsight and so forth. It's kind of jokingly, but it does seem that hindsight is better than nothing, and even that is a form of Promethean foresight, because it's like taking a look and surveying the field and saying, okay, next time there's cycles and we can do better, you know. But I did want to just get back to the beginning here and really try and unpack this thing about what is real foresight. And I will start off with this quote for the week from Hermes. And I think I can do something up, or I can open it up here. It says, all beings can release a revolutionary courage that is capable of moving into the Akashic realm and eliciting from the Akasha the concept of a golden age, the kingdom of heaven, a new humanity. So this is there's quite a bit in here. And we'll probably use some of these other quotes to try and unpack this quote. There are lots of different quotes here. The first one from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Om, lead me from the unreal to the real, lead me from darkness to light, lead me from death to immortality. So this is like an invocation to the higher self, really. And it is saying, please lead me from the unreal to the real. So that's an affirmation that there is such a thing as the real, and that there is a path that goes from the unreal to the real, and that there is a process. So this affirmation is the beginning of the foresight, one would think. Then it says, lead me from darkness to light. So in that sense, just knowing and affirming that there is such thing as light, that in its own way casts light on the path. So, and it's saying that the higher self, affirming that the higher self has this capacity to offer light. And so that the higher self is with you on every step of the way, you could say, illuminating the next step and lead me from death to immortality. We think that that is a clue about Promethean foresight, because this kind of foresight is, it has something to do with our own immortality. We're invoking our own immortality. It isn't just a psychic foresight of being able to read someone's palm, or even to have a dream about the future, which can be very helpful sometimes. But this is a foresight that has to do with our own immortality, because theosophically, all of the wisdom that there is to learn is actually already within us. And it is buried deep within the immortal vestures of our own immortality, our own immortal Akashic vestures. And because of the fact that we are really made of the Akasha, this allows us to move into the Akashic realm in meditation and in aspiration, and as we seek to help others. because true altruistic service is acting based on the idea of our interdependence. And so all of this has to do with moving into the Akashic realm, which is quite an affirmation. And it is saying that all beings can release a revolutionary courage. So this potential of this courage is in every human being. What a wonderful idea. What a wonderful message for humanity. Now, let me see here. I'm going to take a look at some of these that talk about resolution. Okay, here's one from Mahatma KH for tomorrow. Good resolutions are mind-painted pictures of good deeds, fancies, daydreams, whisperings of the Buddhi to the manas. That is so powerful. What an affirmation. And in the context of that letter that he wrote to a woman in Europe who was a leading figure in the Theosophical movement in Europe at the time, he was saying, follow your best intuitions. When you have the idea to do something that's for theosophy and it's for humanity, do it, follow it. Let that become a reality. Let that unfold. And, resolve. And, there's this whole thing about resolving to do something where the lower, more mechanical mind part of us doesn't really want to do that, because there's this whole strategy game that says, well, I want to keep my options open. Right? So, and that may work, I guess, playing chess or something. But this release of this kind of will that is in the service of humanity, it doesn't get involved in petty little things. It's almost, you could say, reckless in giving away. It's that kind of magnanimity. And so that's why the Mahatma here is writing to this student and saying that, kind of affirming the pure gold that's in these whisperings of the Buddhi to the manas, and to act on them, to go for it, as they say. Let me find another one. I'm looking for quotes that have to do with resolve. Well, here's one. Resolve and thou art free, from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Now, speaking of this idea, resolve and thou art free, there is a story of M.K. Gandhi that he talks about the efficacy of vow taking, and that his whole life was based on it, and that his whole life had to do with vows and resolves. And that was how he got through life. That's how he did everything. And there is a story that when he was a very, very young man, he wanted to go to England to study law, to go to London, and his mother was against it. But after some wrangling with the two of them, two very strong-willed people, the way that came out is that she says, okay, if you're going to do this, then you have to promise me 3 things, that you will not eat meat, you will not drink alcohol, and you will not involve yourself with extramarital sex. Because he was married. He was married at age 13, and he's like a later teenager when he decides to go to England. And so he says, okay, I promise, Mom, I'll do those 3 things. So he goes to England, and there's not that much vegetarian food to eat there, really. But he ends up kind of hanging out in kind of the hipster part of town. and he finds a vegetarian restaurant. And in the restaurant, he meets the Kiteleys, Archibald and the other one. Anyway, Gandhi calls them a couple of brothers, but it turns out that one was the uncle and one's the nephew. And so they introduce him to H.P. Blavatsky and Annie Besant in London, because they were in London at the time. And they in turn introduce him to the Key to Theosophy and the Bhagavad Gita. And they actually get him translating it. And he says he doesn't know how, but somehow they got him to do it. And well, that just lit him on fire. So in other words, this quote here, resolve and thou art free. So he did limit his options, didn't he? By promising his mother something. But he followed it through. And then a whole thing opened up, right? And his whole life was based on the Key to Theosophy. And he says this, and the Bhagavad Gita. And so I mean, one could talk about how different parts of his life were manifestations of that. But if you read any of his letters, you can just see the Gita and the almost quoting the Key to Theosophy in a lot of his writings. So that's just an example of kind of an unconditional resolve. It's just an example of how it can open more doors than it closes. Now, there is a quote here, these two quotes that kind of go together for Friday. I think that they're very amazing. One is from H.P. Blavatsky, and that was apropos because that's her birthday. Technically, because it's midnight on this day. She says, strength to step forward is the primary need of him who has chosen his path. Its source is profound conviction. So it's like this profound conviction is the source, and it releases something in us. And it provides the strength to step forward. So the profound conviction is like the overall arc, the overall trajectory, you could say. But you need strength in each step as we go. And it's provided by that profound conviction. And then, so this profound conviction is like the foundations of an edifice. And that's another thing that Gandhi would talk about, that vows, he said, is like building a structure. You need right angles. And anybody who's built a house or done any kind of remodeling knows that you have to work with 90 degrees. Everything has to be square and so forth, or else it's going to be really hard to build the rest of the edifice, especially the doors and the windows. Take it from me. And so this next quote from Vinoba Bhave, who is a student of Gandhi, he says, once the foundations of the edifice, which is the basic principles of life, are well laid, raising the superstructure becomes easy. So this is kind of saying, in my understanding, is when you get the basic understandings of life, and Theosophy would say it is these basic archetypal ideas and ideals that are like in the three fundamentals, and in the idea of unselfishness and of interdependence, and the ethics that are built into the ideas of karma and reincarnation, that these give the basis from which building all of the rest of our resolves and convictions, it gives it a firm footing. So there's so much more to this idea of Promethean Foresight, but I think that it would be a good time to stop, because we are privileged today, because Judy is going to be taking questions, and she could have given a way better talk, but we'll just let her see what she has to say when she answers these questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, for a wonderful presentation on Promethean Foresight, especially bringing us into the modern age of Tesla. who was a genius who knew how to use electricity, which is, of course, a manifestation of Foucault. And of course, there have been other geniuses who took off from Tesla. Steinmetz, General Electric, and also Admiral Rickover, who invented the nuclear navy. My husband once gave a talk on Tesla, Steinmetz, and Rickover as Prometheans, in a sense. We really appreciate what you said and about who really invented the Tesla and our desperate need at the moment for acting now on climate change, as people like Greta Thunberg have pointed out, the great leader of the future and now, obviously. So we look forward to questions on Jonathan's fine talk. Or comments.
Oh, Monica, you want to just come up here and just, because I'll tell you what, I'll walk over there with a microphone. How's that?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Judy. I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on this idea of foresight and hindsight, and the idea that both, if I understand it correctly, are inherent within us. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'd like to do that. Of course, Prometheus, the forethinker, is the great hero, but we mustn't deny the importance of Epimetheus, because especially a person my age now, I've had a lot of Epimethean reflection on my life, even back to childhood. You know, I should have done that. I should have done differently. I could have done better. I could have been kinder. I could have worked harder. But the wonderful thing about Epimetheus is that if you did mess up at some point and realize what was wrong, the source of your error, you can in the future be Promethean. And when you run into that problem again, you'll know how to say yes or no, or act in a resolved and compassionate manner. And so Epimetheus is important. Now, it shouldn't be put down. Unfortunately, we have to have him, as well as Prometheus, the great hero, who is, of course, symbolized as a Titan in Greek mythology. And of course, the Titans are really, in the secret doctrine, the third race. They were very big people. If Easter Island has anything to show about their size, the statues on Easter Island are 27 feet tall. And the secret doctrine says that they built images the size of their bodies. So the Titans were very big people, but they were also the first people who were involved in the way the human race is generated now, the male and female principle. And they were in the middle of that race in the third round, the first that were lit up to the higher manas. I mean, it's the secret doctrine says in the earlier races, you could hardly recognize the physical form of the human being, which was at first astral and then gradually became solidified. But without Prometheus and Epimetheus, we would not have active manas. And although the wonderful Atma and Buddhi are the great higher self in humanity, without our active manas, the fire of the solar Petries lighting us up, for which Prometheus is the allegory, we wouldn't be able to think. And of course, without Epimetheus, we wouldn't be able to correct our own errors, because we are human. And it's very important to be human, and in the main event, not just looking for eternal pleasure. And I think it's wonderful what Jonathan said about the materialists, because even, for example, a person like Clarence Darrow was apparently an agnostic, a materialist. He didn't believe in the afterlife. And yet I remember once a rabbi said to him, "You are a great man because you have defended those whom no one else would defend." Like Mr. Scopes in the famous Scopes trial on evolution, free speech. Leopold and Loeb, these two boys who murdered this boy in Chicago, he got them free from the death penalty. But he wasn't looking for personal reward. He was looking for a right way to practice law in a Promethean way. So I think Prometheus and Epimetheus are important because of our humanity, which we need to have, and we need to grow with it. Are there other questions or comments on this one? Yeah, Robert?
I wondered if either you or Jonathan had any comments about the idea that Prometheus invented the fire stick, or his name is associated at least with a word that has to do with creating fire by friction. And HPB kind of brings this up in the Secret Doctrine. She says it's not connected with pramantha, which has to do with creating fire by friction, where you twirl a stick into another piece of wood, and you have some tinder there, and then it catches fire by the heat. But somehow this seemed to me to be related to the function of manas in incarnation. But what do you think?
Well, I'll comment on that, and then I'm sure Jonathan will. The idea of creating fire by friction, of course, rubbing two sticks together, which we had to do in the Girl Scouts, and sooner or later everybody reached for a match, but we had to learn to light a fire in that primitive way, which was helpful, and even to fry an egg on a tin can, which can be done in hot weather. But of course, the idea of Promethean fire is the lighting up of the manas, the higher mind, and free will. And without free will, of course, life is quite meaningless. To think that some personal God is directing your life or knows what you're going to do, even though you don't know yourself. And so I think there is an analogy here that we have to create our own fire. We have to make our own destiny. And in the Secret Doctrine, there were apparently those who didn't want to incarnate in the human vehicles because they were polluted. They couldn't have been made purely from the stuff of this earth, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, which science would confirm. But in order to bring all this matter up to a state of divinity, those who were courageous enough had to incarnate. And of course, Prometheus is the hero, along with many other hanged gods. I mean, Lucifer is a great hero in Milton's Paradise Lost, and he read ancient Hebrew scriptures about pre-creation. And apparently Milton, although a Puritan, was involved with the Rosicrucians. I didn't know that till recently. And so, I mean, Lucifer is a hero. He suffers. He has to become the devil, and he's chained on a burning lake. Loki, the Norse god, suffers horribly because he is disobedient to Thor, the head god, just as Prometheus defies Zeus, who's willing to allow man just to be a stupid physical being without free will. And so you find this also in Jesus. again, the hanged god. And the Promethean fire of Manas goes on because of these beings. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question fully. So maybe Jonathan could take it further.
I'll just say a couple of things. That was a wonderful answer. It does seem that friction is part of the release of the will, and that we have to not be afraid of friction, that it's just part of the physics of effort, really. We have to light our own fire in a way. But I think also part of that is the gratitude for those who have given us the gift of mind also. But this willingness to make commitments and resolves, that is something that is a roadblock for a lot of people. But apparently in the spiritual life, a person has to let go of things, and they have to, and the thing about a resolve is it's like being willing to incarnate. I think a big part of the Promethean story is incarnation. There's this word avatara, which can certainly apply to the great saviors of humanity, but there's also a theosophical sense in which all of us must incarnate. All of us must get going. All of us must light a fire. So anyway, I think that's all I got.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful further answer, and the importance of wanting to reincarnate, and that means perhaps being Epimethean and looking back on past mistakes. But I remember my students used to ask me, why don't you want to go to heaven? And I said, there's too much work to be done here. But you see, they're still looking for reward or afraid of punishment, which is sort of illogical for a finite life to have eternal reward or punishment. But we have another question coming up from Kay. So please, ask.
K is for Kirk, Judy. Thank you.
Kay.
I just
know you had that icon.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a suggestion. I think both of you kind of already said it, but just to put it in very simple terms, that perhaps this idea of manas in relation to friction has to do with the horizontal and the vertical, right? Because that in trying to start a fire with two sticks, it's typically the way it's done. One's laid horizontal, the other's vertical, and then there's a turning. And the horizontal, of course, we know is associated with matter symbolically, and the vertical with spirit. And then it's the friction between the two that is manas, because it can bridge the two. It's that photic link by which heaven and earth are bridged. That's just one brief way to kind of think about it, maybe.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful way to look at it. I wasn't very good in the Girl Scouts at starting a fire with two sticks, but I think I eventually succeeded. It took a long time. But we have to remember that the horizontal and vertical go together. I remember once a philosophy professor at Santa Barbara City College said to me, because I was also teaching sociology, he said, "Oh, that's just horizontal." And I can't remember exactly what I said, but why is the discussion of the problems of people, especially in the 1960s, racism was discussed so much because of Dr. King's Great Revolution. Why is this considered unimportant compared to philosophy by this particular person? Well, of course, it's important that philosophy be applied to the problems of humanity in the highest degree, which H.P. Blavatsky through theosophy has done. And so I think the analogy of the two sticks and the manas is very important, because also we have to want to live and work for the betterment of humanity rather than just go someplace and sort of have our permanent day at the beach or whatever we'd like, which can happen in a Devahanic state, but we wish to avoid that if possible. I think there's another question coming up. Yes.
Marlon.
Sorry, that's me. I'm having a hard time. I've got two computers on. One has my picture on it, the other one does not. So I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, so I looked up epi as an Epimethean. And it means upon, beside, attached to, over, and outer. Those are all kind of interesting. And it seems this question of friction is very immediate and perhaps lower psyche. I am what you see here. That's me. And that the Promethean reaches up into the infinite. And as is said in the Vedas, that thou art, not this. And so you can have an artist who, maybe tips over a can of paint and go, oh, wow, that's pretty neat. So I'm going to do something with that. And does not reach up into the infinite, which is vast perspective, more eternal, inclusive, all-inclusive. The questions are more profound in that infinite state of mind, the transcendental state of mind, when the self is released from this physical form. And so the Epimethean part, it seems almost as though the Epimethean has made some pretty neat things, feathers and hard shells and things like that. They're pretty neat, but did not reach up to an infinite, eternal perspective, a transcendental perspective. And just very quickly, I think it's interesting. Kirk brings up, the horizontal and the vertical. In Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, Demeter represents the horizontal. The two men represent the life on this material plane, and the women are more vertical. Hermes, Hermia, and Helena, more transcendental. So maybe this is part of the issue. Freeing oneself, one's identity from this physical form to that thou art, which is the seven aspects of the human being and the infinite beyond. Maybe there's something there.
Well, thank you for your comment. Is there a question? It's a great comment about the horizontal and the vertical. Yet it seems that part of the Promethean quest is that the vertical has to come down and help the horizontal move upward on the scale of evolution. And of course, although we'd like to transcend our bodies, we have to live in them and we have to fight for what is right while we're in this physical form and do what is best for it and for its development. Like our brain, we only use about 3%. And our pineal glands are atrophied in most of us. And yet, if we can gradually open up that pineal gland through meditation and sacrifice and service and study, we can transcend ourselves. Yes, I think there's also a comment from Truth as a side note on the topic of myth and technology, the work of Russell Jim Kirkin is notable in his sparking interest. That would be good to look at. Oh, that's a comment in the chat room. So I don't know if anyone else has further comment.
Going from David Grossman. Go, yeah.
All right, David.
You got to unmute.
Sorry
David.
about that. Yeah. I had two thoughts. One, because Jonathan had brought up Tesla. It's interesting that Tesla was overlooked and actually died poor, living in hotels in New York, broke, and he was really forgotten. But the electricity we use today is the alternating current. That was Tesla's idea. Edison was trying to use the direct current. There was a big kind of war between which one was going to go. So Tesla's genius was sort of brought back into the public eye, I think around the 1960s or something, but he was just totally obscured for a long time. Yeah. So I thought, that's interesting thought. The other thing is this idea of harmony through conflict. That maybe that's the stage of growth, rubbing the two sticks together. We all have rough edges and they have to get smoothed off, so could we say that's a certain monastic stage of learning? Rubbing the sticks together?
Well, yes, I think that's a good metaphor for a monastic stage of learning. So the whole idea of the dialectic in Plato, that in the dialogues, if you don't have anybody saying something that's wrong or foolish, as in Meno, for example, Meno is quite foolish, the student of a sophist, and it gives Socrates a chance to teach and to bring the whole level of dialogue upward to show how an uneducated boy can do a geometry problem. Of course, he's being directed, but the dialectic is those who are wrong are important as much as who are right. I know the great scientist Louis Pasteur, who was terribly persecuted in his time, and of course he developed the Pasteur treatment of rabies and anthrax treatment for sheep and a number of other scientific breakthroughs, but he wasn't an MD and he was ignored by the French establishment. And yet, in the end, when he's actually given a medal by the French Academy and recognized for his work, also, he discovered pasteurizing milk and other important things. He says, don't be unkind to your opponents, because even if they're wrong, they can help you become more right by their criticism. So, we live through a dialectic, and if we think someone is wrong, we have to show them why they think they're wrong. It's not totally wrong to be wrong, at least you're trying. And so I think that's part of the Promethean fire of being human. The worst thing, I think, is to be passive and say, well, let's see what happens. We've got a terrible climate problem now. People are burning up, forests are burning, animals are dying, and somebody will just say, oh, we'll just see what happens. No, we can't do that. We have to get out and vote, be active, fight for what we believe in. Are there other questions or comments?
Do you think, Judy, that theosophy is kind of a peek into the future of what a whole civilization of humanity will be taking seriously at some point?
You're asking me, or
You.
I guess you're going to ask all of us. Will theosophy be taken seriously by the whole of humanity at some point? Well, in a sense, the World Parliament of Religions is a hopeful sign, because although everyone there and what we're going to in Chicago next week, or a week from Sunday or Monday, it will begin, is at least coming together, and we're going to listen to each other, because there's no dominant religion on the planet yet. The mode is still Christianity of various sorts, but I think in the future, whatever it is called, theosophy or something else, people will recognize that all of this knowledge came from one great source, and that our differences are because of our ignorance and fragmentation, and our focus on the material, and judging a person by race, creed, color, or condition, or age, or sex, or anything of this sort. So I think that there, even in having such a gathering, there is hope that dogmatism will eventually go away, and a real dialogue will open up. And young leaders like Greta Thunberg and Malila Namali and others are very hopeful. And I think more of them will come, and many of them will be in female bodies, I think. If I can just say, as kind of a feminist. So some will be in male bodies, maybe. But hopefully we will have more great teachers in the future. So, well, it's almost time to end, but are there other burning questions or comments at this point? Because this is, yes, Ken.
Please unmute yourself, Ken.
Thank you. I did the hand thing, but forgot the mute thing. I just wanted to thank Jonathan for the great presentation today, and focusing on the various quotes in the Aquarian Almanac this week. And I'm really intrigued by the idea of vows and boundaries and limits, because in interpersonal psychology, there's all this stuff about having healthy boundaries, and the idea of a resolution or a vow or a dedication, a promise, is very much like those healthy psychological boundaries. And that within those, one can then go within. And the idea that Jonathan mentioned of that, that learning that we're doing is essentially recollecting of what's already within us and opening of that door. And I found that to be fascinating. And I know, Judy, you mentioned meditation is one way, but do you guys have any other parting comments on what are the ways to set up these vows or boundaries or limitations that are part of the gift of Manas, that we're now able to do that?
Well, the Bhagavad Gita says, seek this wisdom by doing service, by strong search, by questions, and by humility. And the wise who see the truth will communicate it unto thee. Of course, see is being know. So I think those four ideas together are very important in the perseverance of a vow, and are in themselves Promethean. I think, what is David have a last comment, or someone else did, or?
No, no, thanks.
Well, thank you, Judy.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you.
Wonderful answers to questions. Thanks for doing this. So Monica says thanks to everybody.
Yes, and I
Next week, what is our topic for next week? I can't remember. I apologize. I'm not being Promethean, I guess.
Training the mind.
Training the mind. Oh,
Yes.
perfect. Good follow through.
Yes, remember how Prometheus Unbound ends, and our singing shall build in the voiceless field a torch for the spirit of wisdom to wield, and we shall take our plan from the new world of man, and our work shall be called the Promethean. So let's get on with it. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you,
perfect.
and for a great talk,
Thank you.
questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Take care, everybody. Have a good week.
yeah,
Bye. Thank
Bye
you.
all.
we'll see you. Okay.